Hello, 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 everyone. I am Christine Firkins, and I am the account executive for the VRI group here at Convo. Joseph?
Hello, thanks. My name is Joseph Tsai, and I'm an account executive for the VRS division. And hello, nice to see both of you. I'm Jack Busenbark. I'm part of the marketing department team at Convo Communications.
I'm happy to see you both and great to have a nice conversation with you all today. So, Convo provides a litany of interpreting services, and you think that only we do VRS, but really it's more than that. Jack, you want to tell a little bit about the services we do provide?
Sure. We've really developed a reputation for providing the best interpreting services. I'm proud of that reputation. We're a very high quality group of interpreters. We follow the vision of our CEO, Jared Musano, and our CSO, the Chief Strategy Officer, Wayne Betts. And some of you may have seen the hangout last week with the two of them.
Yes.
So that was them, and their vision is to take communication to the next level. And we're not going to stay in the status quo. And we want to address how are we going to address the access to communicate, better access to communication, and making the world a more inclusive place for the deaf and hard of hearing community. So part of what we part of the passion is to broaden our business model to VRS, to interpreting services, which is a VRI service. And the VRI service, and that's coming up, and it came up more during the pandemic, and work is becoming more virtually, and due to safety, we had to move to some virtual for some reason. So Convo has been very proud to offer that additional service, VRI and other interpreting services in workplaces. And for example, some of the examples we have, like interpreting for events. Maybe a CEO is going to jump in and present virtually, and we would provide an interpreter for something like that. Others are like maybe on onboarding for an employee, maybe training videos or other videos that the company feels like they need to make more accessible. Convo would be providing that service as well. And I'm really proud of that and that expansion to
Absolutely.
VRS. And so let's talk about more of the VRI, and I'm going to pass it over to Joseph and why is Convo moving to that and not just staying limited to VRS. Sure, and I'm happy to talk more about the history. A couple of years ago, and unfortunately, the pandemic started, and there was a lot of talk, and everyone had the quarantine, and working from home became more common, and so we were talking to some teachers that were working at schools, and they had IEPs, and we had to do in person, so they had to work from home, and how would they provide those meetings? And so naturally, we had to talk about how we can shift and talk. How can we provide a solution for that? And so VRI came up, and so we started testing pilot with two different institutions, and we worked with those two different institutions, and asked them to pilot it and use Zoom, and then use the Zoom meeting with the VRI. So we went ahead and tested that with the two schools, and it really worked out to be such a success. So many of the schools that mainstreams and different companies had to use that to connect virtually with that. So that was the reason why we had to broaden into VRI. So now we had to set up a VRI division and start bringing in more people who would be responsible for VRI, and that's how we brought in Christine and to focus on that portion.
Joseph, what is the difference between VRS and VRI? I think a lot of people are really confused about that. Can you explain the differences?
That's a great question. That's something we should explain. What's the difference between VRS and VRI? VRS is for a deaf consumer, and they could see the interpreter over the phone. So if someone calls somebody to a deaf person, they'll only see the interpreter, and they'll connect with the other person. While VRI, you could see both parties, the deaf and hearing person, and you could see the interpreter on that same screen. For example, like during an IEP meeting, you could see the parents, the interpreter, a deaf teacher, and you can see the interpreter at the same time on that one screen, and that's really a nice benefit. That's a main difference between the two. And I'm sure you can explain more about the VRI as well.
Yeah, I've noticed that a lot of deaf people are like, VRI. It's kind of got a bad rap, and the reputation for it. And I don't understand, why do people feel that way?
Yeah, well, back in the day, there was VRI was kind of directly related to hospitals, and they had a lot of bad experiences through hospitals, and a lot of patients. And they didn't have, a lot of hospitals didn't have access to high speed, and it was blurry, it wasn't very clear, and it was low tech. And so now the technology, hospitals have better technology, better networking. So that's really worked for VRI and the better connection. And back in the day, maybe they weren't familiar with the VRI and what it is. Now more and more people are very familiar with the VRI platform.
I also think that, even before the pandemic, these meetings that used to be, were face to face, then you have an interpreter there. And then the pandemic hit. You still have to have these meetings. They're all virtual online now, and you need to come up with an interpreter. So the demand for VRI interpreters are much higher to have the interpreter on screen on Zoom or something. What else could you use VRI for? I mean, other than a Zoom meeting?
I can give you one example. I remember maybe 7 or 8 years ago, my son's school had asked me to go and I was surprised they had asked me, so I went.
So I went, and I was working out, and I was working out with the school, and the communication between the interpreting agency and the school, it just wasn't working out the way it needed to be. So I thought, you know what? There's an app for this. I can click on an app and this will work. And it did. My son was able to have his meeting. We, took care of what needed to be taken care of. My son went, and he was like, oh, this is what the situation was. You see, having an interpreter there and just immediately with that VRI was great.
And I had a similar experience, and I had to get ready for surgery, a surgical procedure. It wasn't very serious. And so before that, it was a required doctor's appointment to really explain what to expect during the procedure. And that was about a month ago. And it popped up, and I wanted to have an interpreter ready, and I wanted to have an in-person interpreter. When I showed up, and they said, oh, I'm very sorry. And I was waiting in the waiting room, and I was waiting, and they hadn't called me yet. And then kind of looking around, and I didn't see an interpreter. So you all know that experience. When you sit there and you're looking around, you have that look, and the interpreter will show up, and you go, oh, is that the interpreter? That you kind of catch their eye, and you always have that culture. So you kind of peek and say, oh, deaf? Are you the deaf person? Yeah. Are you the interpreter? Great. So, and that didn't happen. So everybody was just moving about, looking at me, and it was a stranger, and it wasn't an interpreter. So, a couple more people walked in, clearly not the interpreters. So they had come up to me, and they wrote me a note and said, I'm sorry, the interpreter couldn't make it. Something came up, but we do have VRI set up for you, and it's ready as a backup plan. And I said, okay, well, VRI, it's kind of I reacted the same way as years back, kind of wasn't crazy about it and it was just like Joseph explained. But At the moment, I said, well, I'll give it a shot. Stay open-minded. I don't want to come back I want to get this appointment over with. So I came in, and the screen was ready, and the interpreter was just fluent, and the internet quality was great. Everything seemed to be fine. The interpreter was trained in medical terminology, so the surgical related terminology was perfect. And
so nice.
So the interpreter knew the context, and it was very prepared. So VRI does have its benefits.
It's kind of like in rural areas also. Maybe there is a lack of qualified interpreters in a certain area in a school district for a deaf student, and maybe, let's say, the interpreter got sick because of COVID or whatever reason, and they couldn't show up. Now they have no interpreter. And you're seeing this more and more, where school districts are utilizing VRI for a deaf student to ensure that they have access in case their actual in-person interpreter isn't there. And it gives students access in a classroom. So, it's really kind of nice.
I just wanted to add to your remarks there. Yeah. Like Jack said, so, you brought in that screen, the interpreters may have already a specialty in terminology. The nice thing with VRI is, if you need VRI and let's say technical terminology, I can ask VRI. I want to make sure that interpreter is very knowledgeable technical terms and so on. So that's easy just to ask for somebody to come in and easier to find. So maybe in an in-person that we wouldn't have that same convenience. So we have that conference, technology conference, goes very well because of that particular benefit.
Absolutely. I've noticed with my role as the account executive here with Convo, I've had lots of customers from many different companies that say, whew, really specialized fields these people are in, so many acronyms, and they're quite frustrated with having a different interpreter every time. But by providing that continuity of the same interpreter through VRI or the same pool of interpreters that are trained with their acronyms, their language, their terminology, their meetings, they can show up and voice for them, and it's smooth and it's clear and it's understandable. Having that consistency of interpreters, knowing the coworkers, their names, their roles, seeing the same people pop up on the Zoom screen or whatever video platform, it just kind of works that. There's no awkwardness, there's no weird silence. And I think that really works for a lot of deaf people that are working in situations where they're in isolation.
This is Jack. So when we're at Convo, and they provide that high specialty for technology, and other strains too, like government agencies,
Ah,
right? So, so maybe you could talk a little bit about the government agencies and what we do for some of the government agencies out there. We don't have to mention which ones, but,
are you asking
with
me or Joseph?
training or something like that.
Joseph, go ahead.
Okay, this is Joseph. So some government agencies, they got terminology or acronyms that we're not used to, we're not familiar with. It's nice the VRI has a group of experts that know the government terminology, and we'll ask for them to be involved, and maybe a large practice or large training. They're familiar with the terminology, and the interpreters are very familiar with those terms. Some of the signs we do have do mean different words, and so when we know we use it in the government context, it's very nice to know the interpreters are prepared for that.
I also notice that people come to us because we have good interpreters. We do a good screening with making sure our interpreters do a good job. And that's really reflective of us and on the attitudes that deaf people have towards having interpreters VRI. Instead of, some deaf people can just fingerspell really fast, but our interpreters are able to catch that and they can smoothly interpret that. They make us sound good. It's great. I noticed that with my meetings with my customers, and I use VRI every day, and I work with a lot of hearing customers, not just deaf customers. And it's easy. It's really easy. I was surprised.
This is Jack. Yes, I agree. I share a very similar experience. The customers tell me that they appreciate the interpreters not only for their expertise or high level of skills, but also for their intuitiveness and the Convo philosophy that it's for the deaf person, and the deaf person owns that call, and in a VRS situation, and that carries over to VRI. So the deaf person is very independent, so advocates for themselves. The interpreters work with that, and they are, and that's my viewpoint. So I view them as a high level interpreter professionalism. So really, and it does embody our corporate philosophy of the deaf person having control, and I'm really proud of that.
Absolutely. And I like how Convo really looks at the situation and chooses the right interpreter for the right situation. If it's a church event and it might be projected where the deaf audience is watching, making sure that the interpreter is knowledgeable about religious signs and can meet those needs in that setting. Or if it's a performance type event, pick the right interpreter to match that, not just grab a warm body, but actually have the right person for the job.
This is Jack. So I think maybe I want to grab this opportunity to pull in a coworker, a woman that I work with, Janelle Ronquillo. She's a vice president of marketing, and we work together very often. And of course, obviously, she's hearing, and so that means that I have to use VRI all the time, every day, here at Convo for our internal meetings. So I just want to grab this opportunity and reach out to Janelle and ask her to jump in.
Hello.
Hey,
Hi, Janelle. Thank you so much for joining us. So now we see we have 3 new people on screen, and now we have 2 interpreters that we've added who are here to present, interpreting for our conversation today. So thank you all for everyone for joining today. Janelle, do you mind elaborating a little bit about, for our audience, can you highlight your experience about a hearing person working for a deaf company and working within the VRI space and interpreter pool and level quality of professionalism? Can you just elaborate on your experience so far, what that's been like? You're on mute.
Sorry, that's a good question. So I work with an entire deaf team. There is 10 marketers on my team. And the one thing that I have really learned, especially with Convo interpreters, is they don't just facilitate or interpret our conversations, but just the cultural awareness that they also bring in, like sign names, really capturing the different personalities of all of the different individuals on my team, my personality, and really being able to build relationships. Also, I appreciate when just the dynamics of communication styles could lead to a misunderstanding, or we don't really quite get it. They'll either pause and help us or clarify a topic and really learn. They take the time to really understand what we're trying to say, especially in business when we're throwing around different acronyms or project names, or, I mean, think about all of the different topics, Jack, that we discuss. Having the quality of interpreting that Convo offers has really been what helps make our working relationship possible, and the opportunity for Convo to do what we do every single day within our company is what we really strive to be able to take to other businesses, with the goal of just making everyday conversations between signers and non-signers happen.
Christine, that's a great points. What was your first time going into a meeting with many deaf people like in VRI? Was that experience awkward as a hearing person with many deaf people present? Did you feel lost, or did you feel like you were able to proceed along and work well with the interpreters? Do you mind talking about that first time experience?
Yeah, it was meeting my team. So there is five people on my team, and jumped right on in on Zoom. It was overwhelming at first because everyone was signing and like sharing ideas. And when I think like in my experience in a hearing world and my previous jobs, that's like a conference call or just in a conference room with a bunch of people. We're all kind of talking over each other. So it was great. The interpreters are like, okay, can't sign at the same time. And so we really just dove right into it and got to understand each other's communication style. We just had to kind of learn and adapt. And it was awesome. It was intimidating at first. And but one thing I do value about my team is
I'm sure.
We all had the desire of getting to know each other. They welcomed me with open arms, and we haven't skipped a beat. We've been able to accomplish what we have set out to be. And I hope that we can be an example in leaders to show all other businesses like, hey, diversity and inclusion is not hard. We do it every single day. Y'all can do it too.
Exactly. Right. And we're a perfect example in that space. We're embracing that every single day and applying that. And that's a perfect model for other companies to mirror. And this way other companies can then become more inclusive and make their workplace an actual inclusive workplace. And we do see that happening more and more.
Jack here. Yeah, I agree. One thing I did want to add that I've noticed about you, Janelle, being a part of our team meetings, one thing that's been really wonderful from that is it helps us because we do have recurring interpreters who know us well, who are trained in marketing terminology and so forth. So they become familiar with our struggles, our challenges, our accomplishments, our failures, and anything and everything that goes along with our job. It gets to be so smooth that even our inside jokes are well interpreted. Even Janelle, she usually has been able to pick up new signs and throws out things in sign language. And of course, the interpreters are still present, but Janelle's able to capture and kind of learn what sign language is and what it looks like as we go on, because the conversation is so fluid, which allows for her to learn sign. And I feel like that's a really fluid relationship building technique. So that's wonderful to see.
Joseph, I saw you wanted to add any comments. I saw before. Yep.
Joseph here. Yeah, I did just want to say the same thing, that I did have a hearing supervisor and we used VRI all the time, similar to Janelle's experience. I think that was just a wonderful, and the way the interpreter was able to navigate those encounters on a regular basis just demonstrates that other companies out there can certainly hire deaf people, use VRI, and expand opportunities.
Right. And I do want to add, there's been a lot of movement recently with DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. One of the biggest parts of that movement, which is often overlooked, is disabilities.
Absolutely.
So companies that are really inspired by and really want to improve their DE&I efforts can look at this VRI as a solution towards that, to make their company, organization, I'll use the word organization, because this applies to all government organizations as well, but to make it all more accessible. So VRI and our Convo interpreting services is just a great way to do that, to bring accessibility into the forefront. Research shows that the more diverse the workforce is, the more positive results that company gets and more results in that organization. And in what, maybe Christine, go ahead, if you can expand upon what ways diversity and inclusion benefits organizations.
Sure. Yeah. Well, having a diverse workforce brings different perspectives to the table. It's not just one way of viewing the world. Instead, often companies will, bring in maybe a new group of people when they our new customer base, when they have diverse minds behind the scenes. So versus, focusing on one particular type of customer, it allows you to broaden your target when you're bringing in customers by having a diverse workforce behind the scenes doing the efforts. One thing I have noticed is that VRI is not just for online encounters, though. A lot of our customers use VRI for their face-to-face meetings, too. Oftentimes, you'll have a meeting maybe 30 minutes in the morning, and then you have another meeting later in the day for another half hour. And then bringing an interpreter in person, where you have to pay maybe a 1 or 2 hour minimum, and they have to travel and park, and all of those expenses are billed to the company. Instead, you get an interpreter on your laptop for 30 minutes and you can have your meeting, and then it's done and you can get back to work. And then in the afternoon, if you have another meeting, you can have an interpreter pop on at any point in your schedule, and you don't have to worry about any sort of efficiency. So that allows for your schedule to be as organic as possible in the workforce. We do offer a lot of creative solutions. For example, there was a basketball team. There was a deaf girl on the basketball team where they just couldn't find an interpreter available for every day after school practice. So we set up a relationship with the coach. We got a big TV screen that displayed the interpreter. So any of the coaching efforts that the coach, hollering from the sidelines, the girl could look off at the video screen and catch those cues and that coaching and continue to play in the practice and game. And so it's not just for your traditional online experience, it's for those face-to-face encounters too. Curious, when we think about the future of VRI, knowing what we know, what would we like to see happen in the future for VRI regarding interpreting? Joseph saying, well, it'd be great if we could get a hologram, have that 3D interpreter pop up on your desk. You never know.
I think we need to call Elon Musk for that, to make that happen. Yeah.
Jack here. Well, we do already have Elon Musk at Convo. Who's our Elon Musk? Well, Wayne Betts, of course. So who knows? Wayne might already be working on that technology. Oops, I may have spoken too soon. I may be sharing too much. Yeah, Janelle.
So the future, I think about this a lot, especially because we live it every single day at Convo. And the conversation between signers and non-signers is our vision is to have it be available anytime we want to spark a conversation between a signer and a non-signer, no matter the place, no matter the time, that can be had. It's available partially through VRS, but that limits you to a couple of many different things. Why not make it available if you go to the bank, if you want to go have coffee in the workplace? The way that we see it is where conversations are happening, Convo wants to provide interpreting services to be able to make that happen. And that it's a privilege that everybody can participate in. We want to normalize that. So when I have conversations with my friends in my network, they're like, what do you mean you work for your entire team is deaf and your boss and your coworkers? And I'm like, it's what it means. We communicate in a different language. We come from different cultures. Working at Convo, I've learned to see things differently. I have learned to improve the way I communicate with others. Just what my team has taught me. I have incredible people on my team. The strength of visualizing things that I am accustomed to, like being text or having to speak through it. And I have this image, but I can't be able to communicate. I share it with my team and it's visualized. And so that is when we're in the business world, when you think about how do you want to spark ideas? How do you want to bring innovation? How do you want to be inclusive and diverse? There's one thing that the deaf community says is nothing for us without us. And by including them, I have seen brilliant work, brilliant ideas, the strength of individuals coming out. And that is because just through conversation and making that an opportunity. So for us is being able to bring that to the public and be able to provide the opportunity for everybody to have access to this.
Yeah, I agree. I think that VRI really makes the world more accessible for deaf people, period. If you go into a store and you interact with a cashier, they can just pull up a screen and chat with you there and get what you need taken care of. Same with if you go to a job, maybe you're applying, you need an interview, no problem. Here, let me pull up my laptop. We can take care of this right now. I'm hoping to see that in the future, not where people are like, huh, what, an interpreter or what's VRI or any of that. It would be wonderful for everyone to know how it works, to know how to make a request, to make it as easy as possible in the near future. And Joseph here, I remember I did travel to China about 2 years ago, and I was visiting a friend, and my friend had an app on their phone where they could go to Starbucks, and it was in Shanghai, a Starbucks in Shanghai, and they used VRI where they were able to place their order at that, in Chinese Sign Language, of course, order their drink at Starbucks. And that was 2 or 3 years ago. And it made me think, gosh, that hasn't happened in the US yet. So it'd be wonderful if the US would be able to provide access for a deaf person anywhere at any time.
That will happen. It will happen.
That's right. That's right. And Christine saying, well, it already is. We set up our VRI program last year and it has boomed and we have seen a lot of strides. So curious to see next year, how might we get into more spaces next year? That's really exciting to think about what that means for deaf people. Any last comments? Anything anyone else wants to share?
I think we're almost ready to wrap up. So I think we're on time actually, but a really fruitful discussion. I really had enjoyed chatting with all three of you and having our two VRI interpreters present. I'm optimistic about the future. As one friend of mine's mother told him, being deaf is a full-time job. And that's becoming less and less true. As the world becomes more inclusive of deaf people in society, I'm optimistic that we're working towards that.
Yeah, that's really wonderful to see. Great. Okay, well, I guess that does it. Thank you, everyone. Wonderful chatting with you all. So glad everyone was able to watch us. Thank you. See you soon.
Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Bye.